I'm Andrew Mayer from the Midlands Aerospace Alliance, and I'm going to be chairing our 4th Aerospace Unlocking Potential Week meeting today. And today we're going to be focusing on business development and new business opportunities. Next. Pamela, to whom I was just talking, is going to be our producer today and showing the slides. We'll be presenting the slides from Pamela's perspective, so she's sharing her screen to make sure that on Teams we all see the same thing. So we have a week of activities this week that you're, I'm sure, all aware of. Tomorrow we're looking at innovation and technology. But to remind you, next week we're going back to our weekly series of drama additive hour meetings on Tuesdays, and our Aerospace Up Hour returns next Thursday as normal. Next. So today's agenda is clear, I hope, from the joining instructions as well as from the newsletter that went out this morning, those of you that have just signed up this morning. So I don't propose to go into this in any detail. Just we've got a slight change of our normal schedule today because Zsofia can't be with us for the whole meeting. So Zsofia is going to talk to us first in a couple of minutes before we look at the results of the MAA survey. We normally do that the other way around. Next. Over to you, Pamela.
So yes, so thanks all for joining up beforehand for a bit of chat and networking. If those of you who aren't immediate presenters and all of our guests, if you could switch off your cameras now. You've been adding, some of you, your full name and affiliation in the chat box. If you could keep doing that, especially people who've appeared as something like business development or a number, that would really help us. I've done the muting, so keep using that chat box during the webinar to ask us questions and to make comments and discuss. We don't mind that at all, even if it's not a direct question to one of our presenters. A little bit of discussion there can get things going. You can flag the topic of a question rather than a full question if you prefer, and we'll call on you, either Andrew or I will call on you to put that verbally when an appropriate point towards the end of the speaker slot. So yes, we are recording this meeting, and it potentially may be web broadcast. We will edit it. We'll take out any bloopers, usually mine, or anything untoward. And the chat section does not get recorded, so so feel free to express your opinions freely there. And yeah, I think that's everything. And
Great.
ready. Hand
Great,
back.
thanks, Pamela. Mike Driver, you might want to switch your camera off. I think your camera's still on. I can see your picture there. Thanks. It just helps with the bandwidth as well. Thanks very much. So I'm just going to hand over to Christina Koch from the University of Nottingham, who's our partner in the programme, to just say hello to you and remind you about the Aerospace Up programme when you're ready, Pamela. Hi, Christine.
Hello, yeah, I'll just start. So hello, everyone. Welcome to our 4th session of the Aerospace Up Week today. Yeah, as Andrew has said, I'm Christina Koch. I work at as the Business Development Manager at the Institute for Aerospace Technology at the University of Nottingham. And yeah, I'm part of the delivery team of the Aerospace Unlocking Potential Programme, or Aerospace Up, as we call it short. The programme offers funded innovation support to the aerospace supply chain in the Midlands, and is being delivered through the university and the Midlands Aerospace Alliance. We've been organising a series of events this week, all themed around the 5-point plan of the MAA, around how to rescue and recover the aerospace industry in the Midlands, and how Aerospace Up can offer support to companies in these challenging times. The topic for today is business development, as Andrew has already said, and we've again got a great mix of speakers, experts from the university, as well as people from industry joining us. Before we start with our first speaker, I think Andrew has a little task for everyone in the audience to participate with. So I'll just hand back to Andrew to explain that before we ask Zsofia to please do the first presentation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Christine. Hi, Rachel. Nice to see you. Rachel, we're switching our cameras off unless we're presenting, so camera and mic off if you don't mind. So Rachel's going to be speaking to us later about opportunities in the rail industry, so great to see that she's able to join us after her last meeting. Yeah, so while Pamela's getting Zsofia's first slide up, and hi Zsofia, good to see you this morning as well.
Hi, good morning, and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone has some nice tea supply or coffee supply for the morning. I do.
I've got my flask ready, and I'm going to open it as soon as you start speaking, and so I can enjoy your presentation even more so. Now, the task I've got for everybody today is to think about how we market the Midlands aerospace industry or region better in the future or in the current environment. We've often found ways to market our work to the world aerospace industry, to explain to people what it is we do, and help them understand what our companies can offer for their projects across the world as well as in the UK. But the situation has changed a lot, so we're really interested if you've got any ideas that will help us to sell our industry and our cluster better to the world's aerospace industry, or to our policymakers, why they should support us. And the task then is to use the chat and just give us some key words. It might be resilience, it might be excellence, it might be something more focused than that. What do you associate with us and how we should be projecting ourselves? So it'd be great if you can help us with some ideas to make sure we sell our industry and the services of our member companies better in the current environment. So that's the task. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Zsofia Toth from the Nottingham University. And Zsofia does a lot of work on servitization that she and I were talking about yesterday, and I'm sure we'll come back to. An important subject for a number of our member companies, who, particularly the manufacturers that think of themselves as more as producers of parts and need also to consider the services they offer to their customers. But today we've asked Zsofia to talk about virtual marketing and the context of how our companies should potentially be promoting themselves virtually. And the current situation is an obvious case in point where companies that may not be experts at doing this might like to think a little bit about this particular subject. Zsofia, I'm going to hand over to you, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, and a warm welcome for the team. Today, we are going to talk about how to increase your firm's attractiveness online. Now, I was asked to give some insights from my research, and this is a disclaimer that if you are interested in any projects there, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to send further details. The aims of this presentation is really around thinking, triggering a thought process and some planning ahead, how you can do things perhaps even better in a digitally enhanced business world. Next, please. And well, large part of it is really not online, but online presence can help. One basic question is around business mating, how you find your partners, the partners that have a good fit with you, with your firm in terms of values and capabilities and so on. During the current situation, it is also about keeping the partners who you want to keep, but also perhaps start looking into diversification if you haven't yet done so. And the online presence can definitely help you in doing so. Next, please. Pamela, next. There's a good old question around whether similarities or opposites attract. And research shows that some similarity is necessary, often at the basis of values, ethics, and communication approaches. For instance, family firms often like communicating with other family firms because the styles of communication and the organizational structures are often similar. However, when it comes to skills and resources, opposites attract. Complementary skills and resources are attractive. So finding that right recipe where you have some similarities, but also some complementarities is important. Next, please. And when we ask, okay, what makes a supplier or what makes a client attractive, often the first idea is financial resources. And it's true, financial resources, financial rewards, and the prospect of financial rewards are really important, but these are not the only, this is not the only important factor. And our research shows that in none of the cases was in itself financial rewards sufficient to make a partner attractive. There had to be a combination, a recipe of different things, whether it's a combination of financial resources and trust, interpersonal trust, or some reputational benefits, or lower costs, relational fit, and so on. It has always been a combination of different things. And planning ahead with partnerships and reviewing partnerships is important, and we can think about this recipe idea, what our recipes are and what our partners' recipes are to work on attractiveness. Next. Well, when we ask, okay, why should we bother about attractiveness? Partly because attractive partners receive more time, more attention, more financial resources, the allocation of skilled employees from the partner, and so on. So mobilizing these resources is an outcome of attractiveness. Now, there are a couple of ways to enhance attractiveness online, and today we are going to discuss social media, online referrals such as client testimonials, and a few other things like online presence on different maps. Let's start with social media. I know that there are opposing views on how important social media is. And in our research, it shows that in business to business, having some social media helps and increases attractiveness. And here we looked into supplier attractiveness. But actually, being too active on social media can have a counter effect. And some of the companies that were too active were seen as being too social and not caring enough about technical and other qualities, service qualities. Of course, this doesn't apply to all contexts, but we looked into quite a few manufacturing companies, and it seems that, yes, having some consistently managed social media helps you to have a stronger online presence, helps you to be, helps the partners or potential partners to be able to find you. But you don't necessarily need to excel in creating engaging social media presence. Having some consistent presence can be just enough to increase your attractiveness. Next, please. Another thing to check, and I looked into some members of MAA, if they can be found online on different maps like Google Maps, and some of them are available there or can be seen there, some others not. It's a quick and easy thing to fix. And if you are not yet visible on these online maps, that's a matter of setting to help your to further increase your online presence. Next, please. And now we are getting into referrals that are mostly client testimonials and case studies or success stories about a collaboration, how great it has been to work with a partner, but also partner logos. So these are online referrals that companies publish on their website, which is the online shopping window in a sense, and you shout to the world with whom you are working with. Now, I understand when it comes to business relationships that have been going on for 5, 10, 20 years, these things don't matter that much. But when it comes to new partners, they want to see whether you exist and what sort of experiences and expertise you have. And again, research shows that actually they search for you online and they check these things, what sort of credentials you have. And the first impression often comes from online presence, unless there's a previous meeting or you met them at a networking event or through other connections, but still they would check your website. Next, please. One example is case studies, and here you can see a case study with the Castle Rock Brewery and Beeston Hockey Club. It's not an aerospace example, but we can see a lot of examples in aerospace as well. And this is an overlooked B2B marketing communication tool. Some companies do have these case studies, but don't really think about how to interpret these success stories. You can think about what the key messages are, what are the values that you want to signal to potential partners, and update these case studies accordingly. Also, it makes sense to check if you have case studies, then are these case studies updated? Is there maybe something to add? And we also did some experiments, and it seems that if you can use some visuals, whether it's a person's picture or a picture of a building or something, that typically increases the effectiveness of these case studies as well as other referrals, so that the manager who looks at this has more motivation to pick up the phone and have a chat with you. Next, please. There are also partner logos that you can use if the partner agrees to do so. Of course, consent is really important. And there were some cases where companies forgot to ask for consent, and that can be problematic. But if the partner agrees, then showing a portfolio of your partners actually helps the potential partners to have a better idea about what your firm is doing. Next. And finally, testimonials, typically client testimonials, although there are some supplier testimonials as well, that are quotes from your partners, shorter stories, shorter quotes about some key insights about the collaboration with you. Next, please. And why are these online referrals important? Well, as I mentioned, the potential partners check the existence of the company. Next, please. And also, they want to minimize risks from their side. So a good portfolio increases the perceived risks of working with you. Next, please. And they also try to evaluate whether there is a good fit between you, relational fit. And that's an interesting thing to consider. Which partners do you want to attract in the future? What sort of values, what sort of experiences do you want to put emphasis on? Next, please. And looking at referrals can increase your market intelligence, because you can go from website to website and look into this is a network of referrals where the blue dots are the companies and the links between them are the referral relationships. So there was either a client testimonial, case study, or a logo published on one company's website to the other. So if you look at the website of potential partners and even competitors, you can map the network of attractive partners, looking at with whom they are working with, and then to the next level with whom their partners are working with, and so on. And the network is not really about these dots and the lines, but also the empty parts, because this way you can map some further potential collaborators and customers. Next, please. And using referrals, whether it's online or in-person referrals, usually makes your organization more attractive. So something to consider. Next, please. But authenticity is really important, because sometimes showing yourself as too attractive can give the opposite impression. There were some companies that put referrals on their website only from large companies and large organizations. And actually they wanted to attract SME clients, but it turned out through a few interviews that these clients shied away because they looked at the website and they saw, oh, these guys are working only with the big guys, so their prices must be just much higher. We would be punching above the weight. But eventually they were trying to reach out to SME clients. So yeah, thinking about the portfolio, and if you have large as well as small partners, then perhaps it makes sense to consider selecting partners to show on your website from both groups instead of just focusing only on the large ones, unless you want to work only with the large ones in the future. Next, please. So to wrap it up, if you are not yet doing that, having an attractiveness audit each year or every other year, second year, let's say, once in 2 years' time or in certain time periods, makes sense to look into, okay, how about partnership portfolios, client portfolios, supplier portfolios? How do these fit your strategy, and also how you communicate these portfolios? How do you signal that in a digitally enhanced environment and also in person? It makes sense to plan ahead with referrals to manage expectations. So instead of asking for a referral years after the successful project took place, even before the project, mentioning that you would be really happy to receive a good referral if the project goes well, then it seems that it is easier to get that referral. Then authenticity matters, that we discussed with this punching above the weight effect. In terms of referrals, whenever possible, it's helpful to use pictures and videos as well besides the text, because these visual representations make the text more relatable and more effective in terms of triggering communications and sales. Social media, I can really second your concerns about whether investing a lot of time into social media in business to business setting is sensible. It depends, of course, on the business context, but most B2B companies at the moment should be perfectly fine with some social media instead of having to be pioneers of social media engagement. And yeah, and there are some quick fixes that you can do, like the location setups on Google Maps and so on. Next, please. If you are interested in further details, I'm very happy to send you an SME attractiveness toolkit that we developed as part of an impact case study at the business school. And we worked with several SMEs, including aerospace SMEs, to develop that, and feel free to get in touch with me. There's my email address, as well as I'm available on LinkedIn, and any experiences that you can share about how you are dealing with the current situation would be really welcome. And I hope that you can take away some ideas from this presentation, and yeah, get in touch.
Great, thank you very much, Zsofia. Now we know that you can't stay with us for much longer, but that's really helpful in terms of some really practical ideas. We work with Loretta Milan, who I think is on the call now from Milan Creative, and one of the things that she did with me was to make sure we had two different streams of posting, one for our company and one for me as the chief executive, and that allowed me to talk about issues in a different way from the way that we promoted the company as a whole. And in order to personalize things a little bit, but to keep the company website, if you like, a bit more official and formal.
I see.
So we've got a question from Dan before you go. Do you have one more minute, Zsofia, for us?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, Dan, did you want to ask your question about partners?
Hi, yes. We work on a lot of research projects, so we used to engaging partners on a research development project, which will be a long-term, 3 years before a product turns up. Would you consider that there's a difference between attracting partners in that sense and the customer that will buy a product off the shelf from us and then potentially come back in another year or two, but potentially not?
I could. We could discuss this for a long time, but one thing that came to my mind about this, that customer and supplier attractiveness are a little bit different, but in terms of relational fit, so similarities and differences, having those recipes are similar. Would I consider partners as long-term customers? If we are talking about customers and not suppliers, yeah, in aerospace the timelines are different, but long-term and short-term are different in different industries. In IT, a 5-year long relationship is already long-term, whereas in aerospace it's not. So I think this is a question that I would discuss with you further.
Thanks, Zsofia. Yes, it's a big theoretical question that I agree. We've got a couple of comments of people who'd like to get in touch with you in the chat, Zsofia, so we'll handle that offline. But I am going to move us on. Thank you very much for starting us off so well this morning, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye now, and please, bye.
Bye. So if Pamela, you'd like to get the my presentation slides. Hi Jim, you've just joined us. Jim, would you mind switching your camera off? That's what we're doing once we've said hello. It just helps us with the presentations. Thanks, Jim. So what I want to do for a few minutes is just go through some of the results of our survey that we introduced earlier on, particularly focused on new business. And I'll just wait for Pamela to get that up. We finished off the survey a couple of weeks ago, and the results are still very interesting, I think. Next. So we had these participants, and they were a good representation of the Midlands supply chain as a whole. So we were pretty happy with the feedback that we got in this sense. Next. What most of our companies expected was significant reduction in revenue for the year 2020. Next. And if you look at what that might pan out to over the year, when companies were 100% busy earlier in the year, it means a pretty low level of activity for the second half of the year for many of our participants. Next. For the future, I'm not sure people really knew what was going to happen in the future or had very clear predictions, but people were at least hoping matters would improve slightly, but some feared that their situation would be considerably worse. Next. In terms of priorities, new business came second. across our different themes that we're looking at this week. People that we looked at on Monday, clearly the first priority, getting everybody back to work safely. And what we discussed yesterday in particular, but also a little bit on Monday, was how we make these workplaces where there are fewer people working because of social distancing restrictions or less business. How do we make these workplaces productive? And we'll be coming back to that in a future session, I'm sure. Next. For 2021, new business was still very important, growing in importance. You'll all note that people were still seen as a really important focus for next year as well. Next. Across our different types of respondents, if we look at new business there towards the right-hand side, the respondents are not really very different in terms of the priority they place on new business. It is the systems integrators and the proprietary technology suppliers who rate new business higher, but only a little bit more. And in fact, the result is pretty similar across all the different categories. Next. So if we then turn to within the new business environment and think about the types of activity that we might engage in, this was the results that our members gave us in terms of their prioritization. And this was a list that we gave companies to choose from. We also asked companies if they had other ideas and wanted to recommend those. And we'll come back to that in just a second. So promoting the Midlands aerospace industry was the #1 priority for companies. And that's partly why we've given you a task to help us with in the chat bar. Those of you that came a little late, we're looking for the right kind of words to use to promote the Midlands Aerospace Cluster in the current environment. But of course, that's promoting individual companies too, because we are the sum of the parts, and hopefully a little bit more as well. Very interesting in this survey, if we look at the right-hand side, and Zsofia is aware of this, by the way, but it suggests we may have work to do. That for most of our respondents, they really didn't rate virtual business activity particularly highly. And that's a very interesting result. We were talking earlier on with Richard, who we're going to be hearing from next, about whether this means that our companies are behind the curve, or that the curve is behind our companies, so to speak, that you don't really need to do virtual business in aerospace compared to face-to-face. It's an open question. Be interested in your views on this. And a good example of this issue currently, of course, is the Farnborough Air Show, which was going to take place in July and has been cancelled because of the coronavirus. And the Farnborough International is setting up a virtual air show, as far as that's possible to do, for the same week. And there are questions, theoretical, I guess, about whether that kind of business development works in aerospace, or whether that face-to-face contact is still important given the many uncertainties there are in relationships in aerospace. So we might start with virtual business development, but I'm sure we'll get on to personal face-to-face business, albeit potentially through a Zoom meeting, as relationships develop. Next. So if we look at any other ideas that companies suggested, a lot of that very similar to what we already had: marketing, information, connecting buyers and suppliers. No real surprise here. Some of the kind of work that the MAA does, and of course market intelligence was one of the themes that people wanted us to focus on as well. We'll be doing that in this meeting too. Next. And in terms of other ideas, when you do a survey, of course, we find interestingly that many of the make-to-print companies, as we'd expect from some of our culture in our industry, don't necessarily have new ideas. One wishes he knew or she knew what we could be doing, but we often have great ideas and suggestions from our specialist service providers, and we can see some of them here coming through that we'll be able to act on as we go forward. So that's the results of our survey when it comes to new business, and has given us some themes for today. We'll be talking about diversification with Rachel later, and developing new relationships with customers with Chris later as well. So that's me finished, Pamela. While I was speaking, I wasn't monitoring the chat, but you might have been. I don't know if we want to go on to the next presentation, or you want to stop for a second and pause to take breath.
We've had one little comment from Beck Carlisle on why that might have why the digital marketing might have come out low, and that's been
Should we let Mick come in,
Shall Mick come in? Yes.
Yeah, Mick, do you want to expand on that point?
Yeah. Morning, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yep, got you. Okay, Mick.
Yeah. So, yeah, just personally, I answered that one as low because, yes, I absolutely need to do virtual business and virtual business development. But do I need any more than what's in place today? You know, this meeting being a very good example. They work very, very well. So development beyond what we have at our fingertips today, I ranked as low compared to the other options.
Well, that's a very good corrective. It's so easy to misinterpret answers which could be given for different reasons if we don't write a good questionnaire. So I'll take responsibility for that. And thanks for the correction. I see exactly what you mean, Mick. So if we'd asked the question slightly differently, we'd have got a different result, wouldn't we?
Yes, yes, certainly from me, yes.
That is my morning sound effect, as some of you know. They were flying earlier on. They had their kippers and toast earlier, and now they're out again. That's the red arrows, by the way, who are practicing above our house. So brilliant. Thanks, Mick. So any other suggestions, Pamela, or shall we go into Richard's presentation?
Yeah, I think going on to Richard would be great. Ben Anderson, who's just joined, could you switch your camera off? We need to give Richard his limelight. You're muted, Richard.
Thanks, Ben. So our next speaker is Richard Brown from Naveo, who's going to talk to us about MRO markets in the current environment. Clearly a different kind of market from the OE market. It becomes even clearer when you go through the kind of dynamic changes we're going through at the moment. Richard's kindly spoken at previous MAA conferences and is a fantastic presenter. So now I've set you up, Richard. We'll have the usual high expectations, but we thought it worth looking at. We thought it worth looking at this part of the market using Richard's expertise and seeing what developments in this part of the market might mean for MA members. So it's over to you, Richard.
Super, Andrew, thank you, and good morning, everybody. And it's great to be with you all. I started my aerospace career in the Midlands at Lucas in Shirley and Solihull, and then it became TRW and then Goodrich, and I ended up in Ford Houses, Wolverhampton. And so in 2005, and then I've been an aerospace consultant ever since. But the West Midlands and the East Midlands are very important to me. Okay, I've got a presentation here that Andrew's going to share with you. So there's a lot of information in it. It's meant to be sort of studied rather than just presented, if you will. I've got 10 minutes. I'll do a very quick red arrows flyby of the presentation. So it'll be a bit of a blur, but that'll allow us time to take questions and have a chat about it. And happy to take anything you want to know about OE and aftermarket, though this is obviously on the aftermarket perspective. Next slide, please, Pamela. Okay, so I've included just a brief slide on historical and forecasted production rates. Set the scene. This uses numbers from our friends from the Teal Group. Obvious, I guess, to all of us that we've got too many aircraft in the fleet at the moment, hence many are parked, but we're also, or we have been, delivering too many or had production rates, forecasted to deliver too many. Therefore, we've seen over the past few weeks or so production rate cuts, and it's quite sobering just to think that this year's production for new aircraft will likely be, this is air transport, will likely be the lowest we've seen since 2006, and we probably won't get to last year's production levels until around 2023. So recognizing, of course, we've got an industry both in the OE and in the aftermarket that's staffed up to support a fleet of 35,000-ish aircraft and a production rates of 2019, 2018 levels, and of course we're down at what looks more like 2006 production levels. Just a couple of things is things are changing very quickly. Just yesterday or a couple of days ago, Spirit Aerosystems in the US indicated that it's only going to ship about 72 737 fuselages to Boeing this year, and they've already shipped 37, meaning that they've only got another 35 to go. So 72 this year. To put that in context, they shipped 606 in 2019. So it's a huge difference for the industry, and a number of you on the phone will be seeing this. And I know this is aftermarket relating, but I get lots of questions whether we believe production rates from the OEMs, whether the OEMs are talking enough to the supply chain. I think the answer is no and no. Boeing is likely to probably have a further rate cut, etc. But I've just got some numbers there. Pamela, next slide. So you may have seen this from other consultancies. This is our view of traffic, of capacity and when it will return. This year it'll be down roughly between 47 and 54%. My scenarios are bookends of bandwidths, so it's sort of the upside, the middle, and the pessimistic, if you will. So it's a kind of gives you a sort of a band, if you will. Next year we'll be getting back up to about 70 to 80% of the peak of 2019, so next year down about 20%, and obviously this is something that is very fluid. And if you go to the next slide, Pamela, I warned you it's going to be quick. Just in terms of things to watch, obviously you see daily things are moving. This is as much a political situation, of course, as an economic situation as it is a health situation. Travel bans, very flexible. Next Monday, we're expecting some air corridors to be, opened up between the UK and certain European and the odd long-haul destination. But America's going through another wave of this COVID, so it's all very fluid, and airlines are in a holding pattern, pardon the pun, in terms of what they're to do. Some good signs that bookings are coming back strong, and obviously people are very aware that if Spain, Portugal and Greece and others come back in for the summer season, then the Brits and the rest of the Europeans will all be wanting to go away, because I sense, talking to a number of people, that we're all sick of sitting at home. But what I would say just on the next slide is in terms of the things to think about. It's all about a vaccine and it's all about a therapeutic, a treatment. So it's all about, if you get it, that they can do something and help you. If you get it, that there's capacity in the hospital systems for you to be treated, and that meanwhile, vaccination coming. But this is something we've got to live with, rather than so I think all of us are adapting, and all of us on the phone know this, that this isn't something we can just stay locked out forever until something happens with a treatment. We've got to start living with it. Hence, social distancing and other measures will be around for a considerable amount of time. But it's all about how much, for the airline perspective, this summer is really important. Airlines make money in the summer. They tend to lose money in the off seasons. Business travel, if you're flying long haul and stuff, people that used to fly business class, etc., they drive airline revenues. So that's going to be key to watch in terms of how business travel recovers and how vacation recovers, and whether or not it's just an absolute hassle factor for us to go. So I just put certain things that we're watching, but it's very fluid. And what I would say on this, I'm seeing a lot of green shoots of recovery. China numbers are very impressive, and certainly EasyJet and Ryanair and stuff are putting more capacity than perhaps they thought they were going to put back on. So it's not all doom and gloom, certainly, and it changes on a daily basis. Next slide, please, Pamela. Okay, so clearly airlines at the moment, number one, just like suppliers, airlines are no different. They're all in cash conservation and short-term thinking. So what you can defer, what you can delay, what you can cancel, what you put on to be doing next year or the year after, you're going to do. So just like Andrew mentioned in the survey, it's all about people, cash conservation. In terms of MRO, therefore, the name of the game is to avoid MRO where you can. And if you're going to put aircraft back into service, you're going to put the youngest fleet back into service first, the ones that are under warranty, that don't need an engine shop visit, don't need component R&O yet. You're going to ground your aircraft that do need something like that, but by the time the traffic comes back, hopefully you'll get some cash. Then you can be thinking about spending money on maintenance, non-essential maintenance, discretionary maintenance, things such as digital solutions, interior retrofits, other things that people know are important, environmental solutions, very important. But in the stopping the blow blood loss, if you will, is really key. So airlines are going to keep their aircraft parked. We've got 15,000 or so aircraft parked. They're going to park them until demand returns, or they can take them off the lease. Or they can return them to service and do the MRO, or they decide, like British Airways is doing on the 747-400s, to bring forward the retirements on that. And the retirement decision is ultimately due to not wanting to do the maintenance on the aircraft. The older the aircraft are, of course, we love the fact that they buy parts for 20, 30-year-old airplanes, but from an aftermarket perspective, that's a cost to the airlines, so therefore they are in cost avoidance. Next slide, please, Pamela. So I'll rattle through these in the interest of time, a couple more minutes. So in terms of this, just before we came into this, we thought the market for MRO, this is global, would be about $90 billion, parts and labor. Now we're looking at a market that's about 40 to 60% less than that. So you're looking at a market somewhere around the $45 billion in terms of spend. And the impact of people on the phone, it depends on what products you're on. If you've got, if you're on legacy and sunset products that are likely to be on aircraft that are going to be retired or parked for a while, you're going to be hit more than if you're on the latest generation products, which are going to go back sooner into service. And in terms of aircraft itself, narrow bodies and regional jets are going to be better protected because we're likely to want to travel, more likely, if you think about just us on the phone, more likely to want to go to France and Spain than we are to go to Singapore or to Australia at the moment. And our businesses may not want us to travel long haul. So wide body aircraft, think Rolls-Royce Trent powered aircraft, GNX, etc., they're going to face a tougher time because that's going to take longer for traffic to recover. Short haul traffic, regional aircraft will be better placed. Next slide, please, Pamela. So just really quick, airframe maintenance, it's all airframe maintenance, labor-driven activity. Some aircraft are going to come off lease, so the activities around that will grow, but the storage implications, so you're keeping your aircraft stored, there's activities going on to make sure that there's no microbes in the fuel, etc. But you're going to retire aircraft before you have to do really heavy maintenance. And you're seeing also, just the concern about any, avoiding heavy maintenance, basically on airframe maintenance. On the next one, Pamela, please. Which is components, so parts, rotables, piece parts, etc. Destocking. If you've got inventory on your shelf, you're going to use that before you go and overhaul a part. Potentially, because there's increased retirements of aircraft, you're going to get what we call used serviceable material surplus parts, where you can take a tagged serviceable part in lieu of buying a new part. So the OEMs, love provisioning sales and what we'd call IP, which are very high margin for the OEMs, but they're an area where the airline might decide to push back on that. So they're going to burn down, and they're also going to look at some of these complex or discretionary mod reliability programs and potentially pause them. Not all airlines do that. If the airline is government owned or has deep pockets, they may well be, and like gold plating things, they thank goodness that those do exist, they may continue, but a lot of other airlines are going to start saying, look, I'm going to put that program on hold for the moment. The next slide, Pamela, is on engine MRO, and it's a wide body, narrow body bifurcation, if you will. And so narrow body engines and wide body engines, narrow body is going to come back into service quicker. A couple of trends is that the newer engines will be flown. Many of those are on $1 per flying hour agreement with the OEMs, so they'll still continue to have their shop visit because the airlines have been paying up to now. So when they need to, as long as they're flying them, they will be, they'll go in for overhaul. Half of the CFM56-7Bs and V25A5 engines have not had their shop visit yet in the fleet. So, so there's still engine MRO. There is a huge, if you've got $3, $4, $5 million overhaul for a narrow body engine, that's a big saving if you can defer it. So there's people that, if you've got aircraft at the parks, you're going to try and burn off the green time, as they call it, on those engines and basically avoid shop visits. Wide body engines, Rolls is going to find it tough for the RB211, for example, the 524, which is at the very sunset, but also some of the Trents, because we've got at the moment not enough wide body long haul demand. So hence the A380, for example, a big aircraft which BA likes, for example, but it's just a lot of extra seats at the moment and you can't fill it with demand. So they've decided to prematurely park them, not retire them, but park them for a few years. Final slide, please, Pam. Thank you, Pamela. Okay, so line maintenance is just what you do before and after a flight, and what you do sort of light maintenance overnight. People like Storm Aviation, there's facilities that do this at Manchester and Birmingham, etc. There's some opportunities in line because people have to kick the tires, run the engines if your aircraft's parked. But line maintenance basically depends on flights, and when flights are down, so is line maintenance. And my last slide that I had, Pamela, on this was just some considerations that we're seeing in terms of, so modifications. Penultimate slide, Andrew. Mods is, cabin upgrades. This was a growth thing, connectivity, passenger to freighter conversions and others. Some of those, will be deferred because you don't need to put a new cabin in necessarily because it's a discretionary cost. And so, but you might still see passenger to freighter conversions because the e-commerce market, Amazon, etc., Alibaba is very hot. And this will be my last slide, Pamela, I think. Thank you. And we'll leave this open, Andrew, and I'll defer back to you, but it's just some other considerations that we're seeing: retirement, repair rather than replace, and look at what you're doing, make versus buy, leverage what tools you have. It's all about efficiency, but ultimately about saving as much money as you can to get through the downturn.
So that's brilliant. Thanks very much, Richard, and well done for rushing through all that in the very short space.
They are
very short time we gave you, but as you've kindly made your slides available to people, they'll be able to see them and refer to them and follow up following your introduction there. That's absolutely super. So thanks very much. We've got a question from Raymond Davis.
Okay.
Ray, do you want to ask your question? Got to wait a minute for that unmuting, perhaps.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Richard, there's a lot of activity coming, and you spotted it very well, I think, in the refurbishment of old aircraft, stripping them down from older aircraft and refurbishing the parts, particularly in Africa, Central Asia, and also the huge cost savings of that. It's been seen in Africa and Central Asia. Are you seeing that trend anywhere else?
Okay, let's answer it in two ways. So one is that the UK has quite a big aircraft dismantling market down in Kemble in Gloucestershire, at Bruntingthorpe, and there's some others where aircraft are stored, Air Salvage and others at St Athan, where they're breaking aircraft down. Aircraft are then cannibalized for the engines. At that level, when you have an A320, for example, let's say an 18-year-old A320, it's 80% of the value is on the, if not 90% of the value is actually on the engines, and the rest of it is gravy. So people cannibalizing that, you take the motors first, you take out the life limited parts, and then as you notice, other stuff, whether it's wheels and brakes, avionics, engine controls, right down to potentially coffee makers, are tagged as and either put through overhaul or sold as used material, surplus parts. And yeah, that's a $5 billion market. People like BA are very good at doing that for themselves, so they self-cannibalize and rob the parts from their own stuff that they've got full back to birth traceability, etc. on that. So yeah, that's a it's a big market that's growing. Right now, there's people who have bought those aircraft, a lot of it private equity capital. They bought it and they bought them for a certain price. And now the price that operators want to pay for those said coffee machines is a lot lower. So buyers may want to buy, but sellers may not want to sell at the price that the buyers may want to buy at. So at the moment, it's a little bit paused. Does that help you?
Thank you. Yeah, it does very much. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So, Richard, just a question from me on a related subject, really big picture, and I know you can only perhaps sketch this. If you were a company which sold its OE equipment at a loss and expected to make all its profits through servicing, you might be a braking company or, who knows, a big engine company. Are they current price pressures and so on the MRO market going to lead to any structural changes there that put more stress on that model?
Great question. So if you're on the razor blade model, a couple of things. Airbus just the other day came out with saying what about a cash for clunkers solution like we had for cars, where governments subsidize airlines to buy new airplanes? Well, that's great for OE, but not great as long as you make your money on OE. But if you're in the wheels and brakes business or the engine business, where you do the razor blade model and you make your money in the aftermarket, suddenly you'll look back, Andrew, and you'll say, hang on, if aircraft are retiring early, or if you're just producing more OE, we don't like that. If we think of a Derby-based engine OEM, for example, that's in that and like GE and Pratt & Whitney, Rolls essentially makes a loss at every engine that goes out. Most of Rolls engines are on $1 per hour total care contract. They make the money as the airlines fly. So Rolls has an advantage to some other OEMs in the sense that as long as some are flying, they get some money. Others who decide not to go into the cost per flying hour, the power by the hour, if you will, when you don't fly, you don't have to pay anything. So, but when they come in to Rolls, they're a cost. So Rolls-Royce will do everything they can, and all those wonderful Trent 1000 issues that they had were, and we know publicly, Rolls has set aside a lot of money for that. Andrew, the aftermarket is key to many OEMs and is where the profit comes by. If you're either shortening the aftermarket life or it's depressed, yes, it's a problem. But it's a double whammy, Andrew, because if they've got Rolls has less shop visits at the moment, it's less cost for them, that they have to internalize when they get the end, because they book it, I think, when they receive the engine. So as long as they're flying and not needing shop visits, they get the money. But yes, you make a great point, Andrew, about these. This is shortening early premature retirement, for example. That makes the whole 25, 30-year business model that the OEMs thought they'd have. It brings it into under question.
And that gets reflected right through to the places and the factories where our people are working, because we've seen that Rolls-Royce, in terms of announcing redundancies for the current year, the focus is on Inchinnan in Scotland, which is a big MRO operation, where they have struggled for years to make the work more and more efficient to exactly increase the margins on it. And suddenly find that they're the focus point of a lot of the quick redundancies, as you imply, trying to cut those costs as soon as possible.
And I think, Andrew, on Rolls' thing, just on Rolls, I think they're working now increasingly with partners. So if I'm not mistaken, the only place that could do an RB211 535 overhaul now is San Antonio in Texas, because they don't do it at Derby anymore. Iberia's getting out of that. So, and Trent 500s, Lufthansa and 3 joint venture is the only place to do it. So Rolls is trying to get out of their own stuff for MRO and use their partners, because once again, then the partner takes the risk, on it.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Richard. Like with most of our presentations, we could go on longer, and I'm sure we'll have you back on again if you're agreeable to that.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for everyone listening. I hope it wasn't a whirlwind, and Andrew, really, and the team, Pamela, thank you for your help and appreciate the support.
Thanks very much, Richard. What we're going to do now is go on to Chris's presentation. Chris Gane is an aerospace specialist advisor to the Department for International Trade, and Chris, you may know, spoke at our last annual conference in Birmingham before this year's annual conference was cancelled for obvious reasons. And Chris, thanks for joining us. I know you had another priority earlier this morning, and hope that everything's okay on that front. And because we didn't communicate much this morning, I have to remind you in public that we don't have long. So Pamela's going to put up your slides, and we want to talk about positivity and business opportunities in the current environment. And Chris is bringing one of those to us that we can work on, increasing our presence in the global market while things are a little bit quieter, perhaps. So over to you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I see there's some old friends on the call. And we've got some regional DIT colleagues as well, which is great to see. I'm going to focus on one element of the work that UK government is doing with Boeing. UK government and Boeing have signed a growth and prosperity partnership, which has come out of the UK government buying the maritime patrol aircraft, the Apaches and Chinook upgrades, as well as the Wedgetail. And the Boeing team, the Boeing team in the US, together with the UK, have committed to 3 things. They committed to increasing their R&D involvement, and they're already getting involved with the ATI, inward investment in the UK. They built the factory in Sheffield, and increasing the opportunities for UK suppliers within Boeing supply chain. And this, what I'm going to tell you about today, is part of that. Boeing is changing the way it structures its organization. And I'll tell you when to go on to the next one in a second, Andrew. Is changing the way it structured its operations. You'll know that it has 3 divisions. It has Boeing Commercial Aircraft, Boeing Defense, Space and Security, and it has Boeing Global Services. But it has now amalgamated its supply chain and operations into a single unified organization. And as part of these restructuring, it is also heavily digitizing what it does and bringing together disparate systems. So if you just go to the next slide, I'm going to give just 3 slides on background. So they are very keen on what they call having a digital thread from end-to-end operations, where this would involve not just the ERP system, the SAP or the Oracle, which is doing the scheduling and the payments, but is also where they will source the information from in terms of sourcing suppliers. I have a requirement, who can supply me? So you go on to the next slide. So you can see here how they're trying to say that their entire operation wants to be on a single system with this digital thread that they refer to running through their entire operation. And the last slide on background, Andrew, if you just go to the next one. And they're calling it Second Century Systems, 2CES. This is the project, the end-to-end integration. And you'll see on the right-hand side what they're trying to do. They're trying to reconcile different disparate systems so that they are linking up the requirements from the engineering and product development teams with the sourcing of the supply chain team and the delivery of the operation team. That is what they're trying to do. And as part of this, if you go on to the next slide, Andrew, they are trying to have a nice end-to-end process within supplier sourcing. So the process is on the left-hand side. They want to find out as much as they can. And remember, this is global, but obviously we'll come to how the UK is going to try and use this to its advantage. But they're trying to find as many innovative suppliers as they can that they can feed into their supplier management system. And the first step on that is the supplier capability database. So Boeing wants to have all of the capabilities of all of the eligible suppliers in the world available on that database, so that when they have an RFP, when a particular team, whether it be, I don't know, the air conditioning team or the landing gear team or the defensive aid suite team or the space batteries team, they can go to that single place. They can search on certain key terms, and it will come up with all the companies in the world which can match that requirement. And then that allows them to have a shortlist for the RFPs or the RFQs or the RFIs, particularly the RFIs to start with. Then subsequently, they want to make sure that as many companies on that are ready to take RFPs. So there's maybe there's it's not full approval at this point, but they'll have done some basic checks on their companies, and right the way along to the right-hand side, we've got full Boeing approval. So the reason why we UK government want to work with Boeing on this is we want to increase the number of companies, the UK companies, in the supplier capability database. And that's for 2 reasons. The first reason is the UK work share on Boeing platforms is about half what it is on an Airbus platform, typically. So we think that it's probably 5 to 8% on a typical Boeing platform, and it could be 12 to 18% on an Airbus platform, which there is absolutely no reason why that should be, because clearly if we can do 18% of an Airbus aircraft, we can clearly do 18% of a Boeing aircraft. So this is a little a long-term objective that we are on to try and boost that. The second thing is, we know that Boeing is tracking all the suppliers around the world that it thinks could not make it through the COVID cash flow squeeze. And so on the left-hand side, we know they've got a risk register of companies around the world. And what they're also building on the right-hand side of the formula is an opportunity register. So who are the companies that if this one goes bust or doesn't do it, where can I transfer that work to? So whereas this was important before, this is even more important that we get as many companies from the UK onto that supplier capability database. I can tell you that there are only 61 companies on that database across the UK. And I can also tell you that some of the biggest companies in the UK are not on it. Now, the reason why I'm just going to tell you this little story is because some of you will be thinking, oh, we supply Boeing, we're on it. I bet you're not. I'm prepared to bet a £5 for every person who comes to me. And I suspect at the end, I'd have paid some money out, but I'll still be up on the deal. Because the thing is that you are, if you are supplying Boeing, yes, you are on their SAP system, their ERP, but you might not be on the supplier capability database. You might have one division or one site on it for one product area. But the problem comes that, you know, if you're supplying, for example, air conditioning systems to Seattle, of course, the air conditioning people are going to put you on the shortlist if they've got a new requirement. But if somewhere else in your organization, another division, another part of your same factory, you've been working on, I don't know, some landing gear, they won't know your landing gear people. The landing gear team will have no clue because they've never dealt with you. So this is why we're trying to get as many companies as possible on that database. So what we're asking, we're working with MAA and we're working with other regional partners, and we're also working with my colleagues who are on this call who work in DIT regions to go out and try and discover the companies that we think could put their capabilities into that database, and also to reach out to the companies who will never believe that they're not on it, but I've got to convince them that they're not, and the reason why that they should go on it, to increase the opportunities for receiving RFIs and RFPs. And so that's why I'm particularly, Andrew, thank you very much. I'm particularly grateful that you've allowed me to come and talk about this. The timing was perfect. And we're going to continue to work together on this at least to the end of the year, because our target is to get that 60 companies up to, well, at least double it. And I'd like to get it to 200 by the end of the year. So that's in a very, very quick summary of what we're trying to do here. On the subsequent slides, which I'm assuming, Andrew, that you will make available, this is just to let you know what's coming up in our pipeline for campaigns. The MAA, as always, will be involved in all of those, and we will give information to you, Andrew, on these. And the last slide is just the contact points. What I say to you is, if you want to email me any other further questions subsequently, or just to make sure that you're on our mailing list to hear about any of those things when we launch them, ping me or Andrew an email, and I'll make sure that you're on the distribution list.
Chris, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. That's exactly what we wanted to do with you today, and that's much appreciated. There are questions for you, but you'll understand in the interest of time, what I'm going to go on to do is to go to Rachel's presentation on rail industry opportunities. And if you're able to, Chris, after the meeting, 12:30 or so, stay online. Yep. And then you may be able to answer some questions there for everybody. Absolutely. We often stay after the meeting, 12:30 to 12:45 or so, for a good chat. And if you're interested in speaking with Chris, we can do that as if we were at a normal physical meeting. So thanks very much, Chris. And I'm going to ask Pamela to get Rachel's slides up. So welcome to you, Rachel, and it's great to see you here as part of our meeting. Rachel and I have known each other for quite some time. She had a fantastic reputation working in the automotive supply chain a number of years ago, and was suitably awarded, which is brilliant. Is working in another manufacturing supply chain at the moment in the rail industry through the University of Birmingham. So really understands us and our industry very well already. And it's great to have you here, Rachel. I shall just hand over straight to you.
Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation and the warm welcome there. So yes, I work across the transport supply chain, so dip in out of auto, aero and rail, but today focusing on the rail supply chain in terms of opportunities. Next slide, please, Pamela. So a quick introduction to rail. The Birmingham Centre for, sorry, the first one, Birmingham Centre for Railway Research and Education, which is where the support that I'm going to talk about is available from. So we are the largest rail-based centre for railway research and education in Europe, with more than, I think it's near 160 researchers and staff, both technical, R&D, innovation, and what we call enterprise professional services. We specialise in a number of areas that are listed there, but I'll pull them together and we can move on to the next slide. The areas that we specialise are particularly focused on decarbonisation and digitalisation, which I think words that will correspond with aspirations in the aerospace industry. So introduction to rail, next slide please. One quick slide just to explain and introduce how the rail sector runs in the UK. And I think one of the key differences, it's probably important around the business opportunity is, and a big difference from the aerospace and the automotive sector, is that rail in the UK is predominantly core funded or underpinned by UK government money, so HMS Treasury, through the Department for Transport, Welsh Government, Scottish Government and Irish Government as well. So the big difference is that that has continued throughout the lockdown period and will continue forward. It's part of the recovery plans and the bigger plans about connectivity and levelling up across the country. Rail is actually quite a large part of that, and infrastructure, and we'll come on to some of those, but particularly around HS2. And a really good example, just to bring that home to you, is that during the Easter holiday and the May bank holidays, which are traditional maintenance periods for the rail network, 87% of that maintenance went ahead. And the reason that the remaining didn't happen was down to lack of people. So that work has continued. And when I was chatting to Andrew yesterday, he said, and it's interesting that in the news, we don't hear anything about the crisis in rail. But that's because this shows that it is funded. So it's cascaded from national, Treasury down to regions, and predominantly most of the driving in the rail sector is via Network Rail. Then we are franchised down into regions and systems. There is a lot more information and I can share that with people in a separate forum. Next slide, please. So there is growth across all transport. That's about connectivity and levelling up. But in rail in particular, there is at least a 40% growth predicted. Majority of UK infrastructure is Victorian. So yes, there will be new railway tracks, systems and links, but a lot of it is about maintenance and refurbishment and digitalisation to optimise the existing infrastructure. Next slide, please. One important thing in the rail sector is, and if you ever looked at the sector, they refer to it as CP. So we are currently in CP, Control Period 6. So the control periods are 5-year periods, and that is how the government allocates money to Network Rail. It gets allocated in 5-year periods, chunks of time, with key objectives for them to achieve within that period. So CP6, as we are in now, April 19 till March 2024, was circa £47 billion worth of money with some key targets. There are three key splits in that money around operations and maintenance, renewals, and then enhancements. A large portion of the enhancements are around digitisation. Next slide, please. Digitisation, again, is a separate presentation. but works on how we connect with people, how we connect signals, how we connect the timetabling, how we monitor sensors of the trains and people. And a really interesting one around digitization, I've been on a call this morning, is how are we going to raise people's confidence that the rail system, not just the trains, but the stations, are safe for people to go to. And digital plays a large part in that. So what is the rail sector looking for? Next slide, please. And I have 4 slides. I hope a lot of these words, topics, correspond with the aerospace sector. So what is rail looking for? In design and engineering, it looks for skill, capability, predictable and consistent performance, BIM, so building information management, which again is digitization of systems and buildings, processes, component engineering capability at all levels, be that design, engineering, replacements, a lot of re-engineering, infrastructure and systems and control, and obviously cost and whole life cost and viability. And similar to the aerospace sector, trains have a life of 35 years because of the value of the investment. So there's a lot of similarity in that design and engineering. Next slide, please. Energy and materials. So again, there is a core, common, consistent call for decarbonisation. So we are, as in aerospace and automotive, looking at lightweighting, new materials, composites, low carbon solutions, renewable energy, alternative energy, hybrid, battery, large scale electrification of routes. At Birmingham, we have a second phase funded project around hydrogen trains. So there's lots of alternative fuels for power, but also for stations. Network Rail are one of the largest users of electricity in the country, not just for the trains, but for the stations and the whole service. So there is a huge call for decarbonisation and alternatives. Next slide, please. Manufacturing and installation is another ask. Increased productivity, lean process and management is important in this area. Again, green, low carbon solutions, and in particular in new build and in renewals, off-site constructions. The majority of rail sites are not particularly accessible. So if we can pre-construct and take to sites, that is a huge advantage and an area that is being looked at quite carefully. So that infrastructure, off-site, brownfield manufacturing, construction is really a key area. And obviously they're always looking for the skills that embed into BIM or embed the project. So looking at BIM is important. Next slide, please. Okay, so underpinning all of that, similarly to other transport sectors, is the research, development and innovation. As I said earlier, the core rail system is fairly antique. So we are looking at innovation to help upgrade and change. A lot of that is market driven. So some of the digitalization is in rail, new world, but it is about connectivity. I think the rail industry, compared to aerospace and automotive, is very traditional, old-fashioned and maybe slow. So there is currently lots of pressure to speed up projects, speed up innovation, partnering and collaboration, because of the scale and size of many projects is a core requirement. There is a national call out currently, and with Birmingham looking to host a central data, I call it a data dump, but data that we can use for innovation, for testing, but also to enable us to do proving that will then increase procurement confidence. Digital railways, which I could do a whole hour session on, but actually how we integrate the Internet of Things, access and utilise modern communication technology, 5G across the railway system. Lots of test and trial projects. And we're lucky that in the Midlands we have the only whole loop test track centre. It's on our doorstep in Stratford upon, just outside Stratford upon Avon. That is a bit of a secret, but that is where we're working with companies currently to get some real life testing. And there is a call for this cross-sector collaboration, so particularly across automotive and aerospace. Next slide, please, Pamela. So just a couple of slides, again, with no detail, but to get you interested on regional opportunities. Next slide, please. Okay, Midland Metro. So there's a nice diagram there of the Midland Metro and its expansion. It is going ahead. In fact, I know that there was lots and lots, many tons of concrete poured in the centre of Birmingham yesterday as part of that expansion. It is going ahead and is fully funded. The grey areas at the end, so the East Birmingham Solihull is not yet funded, but is currently going through planning permission. It is a publicly funded project, and there are requirements for SMEs, local engagement for jobs, upskilling, apprentices, and supply. So that is definitely one to look at. Next slide, please. HS2, Curzon Street now has full planning permission, and in fact this morning there's been an announcement about 3 companies have been shortlisted for the £570 million build of Curzon Street. So hopefully by the end of this year we will know who has won that. Each of those, it's a collaborative project, so a major company, they all tend to be joint ventures, win those projects, but they are expected to abide by HS2 requirements, again, about local supply and SME engagement. I think they have a 70% local supply target and a 45% SME target. So there's just a couple of a few bullet points around some of the opportunities that are coming up soon in terms of pre-qualification. Areas that I thought might be interesting in terms of the engineering relevance between rail and automotive, aerospace. Next slide, please. There are lots of other opportunities. This morning I've been chatting with somebody on the Oxford to Cambridge link that is currently in construction. And again, they have similar requirements for SME and innovation and new suppliers. So DigiRail is an ERDF, European funded SME support programme. Currently, we have funding to work in the West Midlands, Birmingham and Solihull, Coventry and Warwickshire and the Black Country. And we bring together the skills, the expertise, the knowledge and the research and innovation opportunity. If you could flick to the next slide, please, Pamela. We offer 2 programmes or two project areas with it. Get into Rail, which in essence is a further development, support and coaching around the topics that I'm talking about. What is rail? What are the areas that are relevant for you? How can you access it? Who are the right people? What are the product services that they may be interested in that I have, and what do I have to do to get there? Then if you are looking and have products and services that are relevant for rail, how do you make them rail ready? So that is where the innovation support and potentially access to testing, we can help with that. But we are also focused on not just existing rail suppliers, but new to rail companies. So a really good example is we're working with a robotics company that makes robots. He has these robots that can, using UV light, sanitize areas that he's using in conference centres in the main. Currently, we're helping him develop that into a system that you can run down a train and in a train station, but it will need testing. So there's a bit of innovation and relevance there for somebody who's never even thought about rail before. So next slide, please. So there is support available to help you get into rail and understand rail. If you're not an SME in those areas, as the University of Birmingham, we are still able to at least talk with you about your ideas, your opportunities, the relevance. We can, in many cases, we can work with companies and do the get into rail remotely and help you understand the sector and determine whether there's any opportunities. We have labs. In fact, we have a new building that is being built, should be ready in November on main campus. And also there's an aerial shot of the QRTC rail testing in Stratford-upon-Avon. Next slide, please. Conscious of time. The other one I just wanted to alert you to is the Rail Alliance is a similar organisation to the MAA. There's the website there. Free community membership option that at least gets you a minimum level of information. Again, worth looking at that as a starter for rail. Next slide, please. So the next steps, I think this is my final slide, Pamela, when you click on, is what would I suggest you do? align your thought and your offer potentially with the 4 C's: capability, cost, carbon reduction, and customer. Be clear about your whole life cost, life cycle management, and particularly predictive maintenance. Are you able to demonstrate advanced manufacturing, digital, lean in your work environment, your products, your processes? Consider taking your existing product processes and testing and proving in a rail environment. And obviously talk to us at DigiRail about understanding the opportunities and how we can help you with those next steps. And then I think my final slide is just contact details. So happy, we're almost bang on time, Andrew, but happy to stay around for some questions.
We are brilliant. Thank you very much, Rachel. That was super. So what we're doing here is just putting out an opportunity through our contacts, through Rachel and her colleagues at the university, for companies that are obviously looking for new opportunities at the moment, as naturally happens at this point in time. When the automotive industry's been down in the past, we've seen their companies look to aerospace. One of the key attributes of our region, I would say, is that we have all these different markets that our companies work in, and that helps with a lot of flexibility for small companies as well as employees. So really good to hear from you there, Rachel, and we'll continue those links through our Aerospace Up programme as well. So we do have some questions for you, but what I'm going to do, it is 12:29. And which is absolutely super. I'm going to do what I've done in the past. I'm going to formally close the meeting so that those of you who need to get off to do other things can do that, and thank our presenters today, Zsofia, Richard, Chris and Rachel, as well as our respondents to our survey. Thank them for their participation and support today, and then close the meeting formally. And then we'll move on to a bit of chat and take up some of those questions for you, Rachel, and for Chris in the next few minutes or so. So thank you very much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for our innovation session. And that will be, by the way, our final Aerospace Up day. And there'll be a lot more, I should say, about that on innovation funding, on how you can get support through the programme. So we look forward to hearing more from you on your ideas tomorrow as well. So let's start with Rachel, I think, and then go back to Chris, if that's okay. We've got, thanks to Rachel. I don't know, are you still on the phone mic, or have you had the line mic, or have you had to leave?
No, I'm still here, Andrew.
Do you want to go ahead and ask Rachel your question about rolling stock?
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Great presentation, very much appreciated. Can you and/or Birmingham help getting into, or looking into the possibility of getting into the supply chain for rolling stock? Locomotives, yes, and that side of things.
Definitely.
Okay.
We can help you understand who are the people and how you connect with them. Contact me separately. Outside of this, you've got my email address. Or Alex.
Yes, fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Let's conversation and maybe organise a call. But that is definitely one of the areas that we have lots of contacts in.
Fabulous. Thank you. I will do that.
Okay.
For sure. And thank you again.
Pleasure.
Super. Pamela, did you pick up anything else for Rachel as well? I thought there was something else that I can't find now.
There's something about glue for supply chain resilience. So yeah. Oh, and then Christina said that you can look at rail diversification within Aerospace Up as well.
Oh, it's a good point to make.
Which is a good point, because in essence you could get a double bite of the cherry. I think both Birmingham and Nottingham be quite happy to work with a client, so that because most ERDF funding there is a restriction in terms of the hours and the amount of effort, but we could do a stage 1 and a stage 2 between us.
That's absolutely right. So for both of these programs, Aerospace Up and DigiRail, as Christine's pointing out, you can be supported twice, once by each program. And if we do that in a coordinated way, then we can make sure that companies are able to get the right kind of support, because both programs support companies either to diversify, for example, out of aerospace to add rail to their bow, and also to bring companies into rail, which is Rachel's program. So that's kind of how that would work.
And a really good example of that would be some of the information that was the first presentation this morning about how to digitalise your offer and communicate it, which is really important in rail as with the other sector. That could be a stage 1 type activity in terms of preparation, and then we could do stage 2 very specifically on the rail bit, which would give actually quite a nice bigger project, but utilises both funds effectively.
Yeah.
So
No,
maybe
great.
we need to talk more with Nottingham.
No, absolutely. Well, we're just starting Aerospace Up, as I think you know, and we're reaching out to other programs, which is why Sarah and Christine and I were on that call with the Warwick and Coventry people a couple of weeks ago. So, and we'll be building on those links, I think, that we're partly developing through this program as well. Super. Let's go back to questions for Chris then, if that's okay. Chris, you still there?
Yep, that's me.
Chris Gane, hello. So I'm just trying to go back to find those questions.
Yeah, Mick you asked, how you doing, mate? You're right. Mick asked,
Chris, yeah, I'm good, thank you.
If he said so Mick has actually been through the process with us. So we reached out to Mick and we sent him a blank copy of the Boeing assessment form, which we worked with Boeing to put hints and tips on, guidance, annotated notes. So Mick went through that and filled it in, and we gave some comments back, and then he has sent that into the Boeing assessment team. And Mick, you've received an acknowledgement back, which means that you are on the database. Well done.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you. Yeah, that's great stuff, and very much appreciate your help, Chris.
Okay. And BABC Pacific Northwest asked if they can get involved. You know, we didn't think, it's very remiss of me, I didn't think of BABC as a resource to go to. I mean, we know Catherine well over there because she organised her conference the day before we actually did a big event in Seattle back in September. So if you email me, let's find out how we can use BABC to help engage with the SME community who can deliver directly to Boeing. And if you know people who are already supplying, I've got access to the companies that are on the database, and I can tell you whether they're on there or not.
So thanks very much. And Raymond's joined a couple of our calls, got to know us during this period, and was participating, I know previously, Chris, with the Pacific Northwest Aerospace Alliance, one of their webinars and so on. So we've discovered this parallel track, which is great to explore. There's a person who goes under the pseudonym of Business Development, which we may have seen as well, who had a question for Chris as well. I don't know if that person is still on the call. I can't see who it is. I'll read the question out anyway then. You may have seen, Chris. Do you believe in the short term Boeing will increase their engineering capacity to manage new UK suppliers to the approved register?
Well, it's difficult to know exactly what that's referring to. If that means to become fully Boeing approved, an approved supplier, then we know that some companies have found a little bit of a bottleneck in terms of getting that full approval. This is not full approval. Boeing would hopefully be motivated to get you approved if you've been through the RFQ and won a contract. That's a separate issue, and we are working with Boeing to try and make sure that approval doesn't slow down people actually starting to work. This is very different. And the team is a different team that's looking at the capability database. And so far, if you take Mick's example, he submitted that, and I think only a week later got a confirmation back that he's now on the register.
Andrew, it's Mike Burns here. It was me. I don't know what happened, but for whatever reason.
Sorry, is that you, Mike?
Yeah, sorry.
You need to speak up again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Andrew, I don't know what happened. I did put my credentials in, but for some reason it didn't come through. But Chris, thanks for the answer. I'm very keen to understand how companies can get themselves onto the register, because I've been through the process. I know how tedious it can be, so it's good to have some support.
Yeah. Well, what I'm going to do is people can contact me directly, but I've also given the resource pack to the MAA, and you could get that from them or from us. And we as I said in the chat, we're going to go around this more than once, because we do feel, and Andrew and I have talked about this, and we do feel that there is a real opportunity to pre-position UK companies to take a market share. Although the market may be smaller, let's use this as an opportunity to increase our market share, so that when it comes back, we are disproportionately benefiting in UK PLC.
Absolutely. And if you think of the credentials and capabilities within the supply chain, there's such a close marriage, and it's an absolute must.
Well, here's one more shocking statistic. When we first started working with Boeing 4.5 years ago on this supply chain project, approximately 16 to 17, maybe 18%, only 18% of all Boeing RFQs made it to the UK, which is just shocking. I could tell you that last year it's only 24%. So only a quarter of all Boeing RFQs across all their divisions make it to the UK. That's because they don't know about us.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's going to be a couple which are US classified and are never going to go outside the borders. But come on, I mean, the capability we have in the UK, I mean, even the capability we have in MAA could answer probably at least half of them.
Yeah, without doubt. I've been through the process. I got a company Boeing approved, so I know for sure. It wasn't in the Midlands region, I have to say, but it's not the point. There's definitely goodness within the Midlands community that is a natural marriage to what Boeing are looking for in terms of that extra capacity and know-how.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to you, Chris, on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Great. Thanks very much.
For everybody, my email is on this chat, and it will be on the end of the slides that Andrew makes available. Email me and I'll make sure you get the resources you need.
Thanks very much, Chris. We've got
Thanks,
a couple of questions for Mark, if he's still online. Mark Freeberg Apostle.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah,
Hi, Mark. You had one of Rachel, didn't you, about how they measure SME engagement or participation?
She mentioned participation within the Midlands and SME usage. Is that for employment or for purchase through the business?
It is for, but there are targets for both. So the employment one will be around local employees. That will tend to drill down into long-term unemployed people and apprentices and what we call NEETs, not in employment, education or training youths. So it's about getting them started. And actually the lady that runs that scheme at the Metro, her terminology is, if I can get young people into working on the railway system, get them tired and knackered and worn out so they don't go out at night causing trouble. That's one of her ambitions in life. So there is a target for employment, but there is also one for local supply as well.
Okay,
I would suggest if you look at the Midland Metro website, it will give you the basic information on that.
Fine, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark. And Mark, did you have a question for Chris as well to do with the availability of some documentation, was it?
Yeah, it's the final Boeing assessment. So I understand the gateway to get through to the RFQ, but what will be most important for most businesses is the final Boeing assessment. I'm just wondering if there's any opportunity to get hold of that information so businesses can assess the type of work they're going to have to do in order to meet Boeing standards.
Yeah, I mean, Boeing at the moment, in terms of encouraging people to come onto the database, Boeing don't feel that they need to give all of that criteria. So what they're asking is, similarly, as we've heard in other presentations on the rail, if you are a company and you believe you have innovative technology which would make Boeing more competitive, and that can be through performance or performance of the product, performance of you affecting the price, your delivery performance. they want to know, are you the sort of company which is going to be around their bronze, silver, gold standard? Are you delivering 99.8% OTIF with 98.7% acceptance? Have you got some type of improvement program that you're going through? So that there are a number of characteristics, and the resources information that I can send you or Andrew can send you will have some of those criteria in it. In terms of just about the full approval, if Boeing have selected you as part of the RFP process, then they are motivated to help you through that. And Boeing does have a team on the ground in the UK, Boeing who report to the US, both for defence and for commercial aircraft, who will help you through that process. I say that one thing that UK government is looking to do is we are trying to encourage Boeing to pre-approve. So back to my point that you've got companies in the world that are on their risk register, and we want them to have a great suite of UK companies on the opportunity and problem solving to solve their supply chain problems. Boeing, wouldn't it be a great idea if we pre-approve some of those? So you don't have to wait until you've got a real problem. You know that you can just take that package of work, send it over to that company, and tomorrow they can be cutting metal and they can be fully approved to deliver.
I think that's a really important part. I think a lot of companies, particularly in the West Midlands in aerospace, don't necessarily know that they're at the cutting edge or that they have something that Boeing can't access. If they're continually supplying to their normal supply chain or through their normal supply chain, it's already understood their capabilities. It doesn't necessarily mean that those companies recognize that they have something to offer Boeing that Boeing need.
Yeah. Mark, what role do you have in your company?
Sorry, what do you say?
What role do you have in your company?
I don't have a role within a company. I own my own company, training company.
All right, okay, that's okay. Because I would say that if you were a BD guy, then you should fall on your sword for saying such things. And if you were an MD, then you should go and talk to your BD guy and say, why do you not know that Boeing want our products? Because that's good market analysis and market research.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that in the slightest. But having worked with a number of aerospace companies, there is an over-reliance on, we have this customer, we're going to be here forever.
Well, I think that changed in the last 2 months, didn't it? I hope it did. I hope people have set up.
Has it really with the people that are in place? I think, yes, there's a very keen requirement to move forward, such as this sort of event. But people need a little bit support in how do we move out of our normal business development? How do we offer an opportunity to, if you like, a different customer, somebody we haven't worked with before, somebody we're not comfortable with?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly between DIT and the central government and people like Andrew at MAA, we are trying our damnedest to get that message across to everybody and saying, look, even if you have an inkling, here's the opportunity you didn't know about. So it's about communication of opportunity. And then both MAA and Department for International Trade will sit down with you and actually help you in terms of engaging with Boeing. And as I said, just to get onto this database, we've sat down with Boeing and gone through all the hints and tips. What do you want in this box? What would be best to write here? What do you think? And we give that out. But so I hope that companies seem to do that.
Going back to your comments earlier on that there aren't that many people who are actually on the list, would suggest that not enough business development or managing directors understand how to make that step, or else they will be on that list.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree. And
yeah, I'm going to cut you guys off if that's okay, because you are violently agreeing with each other, and we're all violently agreeing with both of you, and that's partly why we're here, as Chris says and Mark said, because Mark Wood had a question as well and has politely raised his hand. Over to you, Mark. Well, he had politely raised his hand. Are you there, Mark? If you are, we can't hear you.
I'm on mute. Yeah, I'm doing a Norman Collier impression. Sorry. Yeah, I was just really enjoying the conversation, and I think a lot of the answer lies this in the discussion yesterday on supply chain resilience. So yes, great, you've got capability, you can fill a void of something that Boeing might need or any other potential customer within rail. And Rachel's slide right at the end, I think, was the key bit within it all. Is it's okay having that capability, and I'm talking as a procurement professional running my own procurement services business for manufacturing. When people send out proposals, they're looking for, okay, great, you've got AS 9100 Rev D, or they've got ISO 9001. But when I walk into a manufacturing facility, are your visual management boards up to date? Are they relevant? Can you demonstrate that you're in control of your business? Have you got anti-bribery and corruption policies? What's your environmental policy? All those other things. That is a total all-round capability, and some of it comes down to values-based sourcing type activity. And ultimately, you have to be able to demonstrate that you are cost competitive and in control of your costs as well. And all of those things, like, you are then able to demonstrate. It's a great sales pitch to say, yes, I've got a great product, I've got a great bit of innovation that meets your needs, but I'm also a fantastic business because I can demonstrate to you I've got all of these things in place. And I think that is a vitally important ingredient going forward for people.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, and
I think Chris is going to violently agree with that as well. So go ahead, Chris.
Well, I can tell you that Boeing do recognise exactly what you've said, and Boeing have looked at what sharing in growth does, for example, which is more than just doing a value stream map. It's a complete look at the end-to-end management process of a company, and has given some feedback into, for example, SC21C and G. But even if you're not on either of those, on this capability database form, there's a section which is like a freestyle bit. And I urge all companies to write what they are doing, all those words that you've just said, because Boeing recognise the importance of that in terms of resilience, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen, colleagues, it's now 10 to 1. We can hold a great conversation like this, but only one at a time until we work out how to get separate rooms set up in teams for you to go and have a cup of coffee in. And I know there are a number of people still on the line, but I'm going to call it a day if that's okay with everybody. And again, thank you, Chris, for staying on the line as well. Absolutely super. And I believe you really do live in a castle, don't you? That isn't a fake background you've posted there, Chris.
Well, I saw some people were using the electronic background, but if I sugar my camera, you'll see. Yeah, look, see, it's real library.
Yeah, no, I thought it was. Yes. We didn't want people to fear otherwise that you'd.
There you
go.
It's a sticker, $29.99 on eBay.
You've got a real date for when you to show that it really was taken today. So listen, thanks very much, Chris. That was super, and thank you again to everybody for participating. And tomorrow we're off into innovation, how we help small companies to innovate, and we're going to be looking particularly to electrification with the experts from the University of Nottingham, a point that was being made very strongly by Rachel. So thanks very much, and see you all tomorrow.